Hi, I'm Peter Tragos, host of the Lawyer You Know podcast and YouTube channel. The saying goes, everyone hates lawyers until you need one. Well, I'm here when you need one to answer your questions and give you insight that you didn't know you needed. Along with my partners, Pete Sardis, the professor, who has a finance and business background, and George Tragos, my dad, and the consigliere, a criminal defense giant, we can answer any questions you have. So what's going on with Alec Baldwin and these lawsuits, these civil lawsuits for wrongful death of Helena Hutchins that happened on the set of Rust, where Alec Baldwin was the one who, I want to say pulled the trigger, but I keep having to stop myself short, who cocked the hammer back before the gun went off, shooting and killing Helena Hutchins. So when diving into this, we've looked at a bunch of the lawsuits. We've talked about the criminal implications. We've talked about a lot of this already. But there is something new to discuss today, and that is whether or not Alec Baldwin and his attorneys have shielded him completely from civil liability. Alec Baldwin has filed an arbitration demand based on his contract, which was like $250,000 to be the lead actor and one of the producers on the film of Rust. They have filed a demand for arbitration saying that contractually he cannot be legally liable for any damages that occurred on the set of Rust, including the death of Helena Hutchins. And not just that, but I think it's one of the Rust Productions LLC also has to pay for all of his attorney's fees. So he files this document and again gives a detailed explanation of exactly what happened when the shot was fired, asking for this relief from the court. And there's going to be an arbitration decision as to whether or not, it almost seems like a deck action, what I would call a deck action, a declaratory judgment, to basically say whether or not Alec Baldwin can be shielded from liability. And really, it doesn't just mean that he's shielded from it. It would mean that somebody would indemnify him, meaning if a civil judgment was found against Alec Baldwin, one of these other companies would have to pay for it. And that happens sometimes in contracts, a lot of times actually. And where it's really common sometimes is lease contracts where, Walmart, I mean, they usually own the buildings they're in, but let's just say some mom and pop restaurant leases from a strip mall, they can sometimes be indemnified from the strip mall. So if somebody trips over something in the parking lot or a curb that the strip store controls and owns, even though they were coming to eat at Tragos's Pancake House, they can't sue me. They only can sue the landlord. Or vice versa. If something happens in my store, we can indemnify the landlord, meaning you can't sue the person that owns the property. You can only sue me, Tragos's Pancake House, for what happens in my negligence in my store. So indemnity agreements happen all the time in business. And it seems like Alec Baldwin thinks he may have one in this case. Now, I haven't seen that agreement. I haven't seen this actual demand. I've just right before starting the show, saw a bunch of articles coming out on that, which I think is a very interesting portion, because again, we've talked about the difference between criminal and civil liability. Nobody can indemnify you criminally, but civilly speaking, somebody can pay the damages for you. And if they have undertaken that responsibility, and if they have indemnified Alec Baldwin, he can just sit back and whatever happens, happens. Now, he doesn't want to be held civilly liable for this, so he's still going to fight it, I'm sure. But what additionally came out in these documents, in this very detailed description of the last shot, or the only shot fired that killed Helena Hutchins, it almost seems like, and a lot of reports are, that he actually is blaming Helena Hutchins. She directed him, raise the gun higher and higher and higher and higher, and cock the hammer back, cock it back a little bit more. And he even puts in the document that the script calls for him to pull the hammer back. And Helena Hutchins wanted him to point the gun exactly where he pointed it. And it seems like he's even pushing some blame on her, which could be shocking and maybe despicable to a lot of you, but you may be surprised. Civil defendants point the finger, no pun intended, at victims all the time. They say why it's the victim's fault. We have rear-end car accidents where somebody's sitting at a red light and they get rear-ended, and the civil defendant will say they stopped too short, they stopped too quick, when they really just weren't paying attention. We have sexual abuse victims who the perpetrators blame the victims. They asked for it. They wanted it. They should have been dressed like that. So it is not uncommon for civil defendants to blame civil victims in cases like this. And Alec Baldwin seems to start moving down that road. And also submitted with this filing is that there was a lot of text exchanges between Alec Baldwin and Mr. Hutchins, and how they had a good relationship, mutual mutual, what is the word I'm thinking of? Condolences. There we go. Condolences. Mutual condolences about what happened in the text conversation ended up morphing into a relationship that deteriorated quickly. And now Mr. Hutchins has sued Alec Baldwin and named him as the main defendant. And Alec Baldwin is blaming Elena Hutchins for what happened. So that turned, which, I mean, I'm not going to pat myself on the back because it was very obvious to anybody that's handled any cases like this in the beginning when they seemed like they were cordial and on the same page. I knew that wasn't going to last long. So we called it, but it wasn't that shocking of a call, in my opinion, that was going to deteriorate. So as we learn more about what contracts were in place prior to the filming of Rust, I think can have a huge difference on how this case is looked at, who is held responsible for it, and who actually is punished for it. Because if there's no criminal liability, the only punishment is a civil judgment against you, money damages against you, and maybe Alec Baldwin can shield himself from most of that. Let me know what you think. Is it fair or unfair that, contractually speaking, Alec Baldwin can be shielded by this provision when he did something that ended up resulting in death, and something that a lot of you, and I think I agree with, seems shocking to me that he didn't check the gun, didn't look to see if it was a live round. So to me, there's a lot of things going on in the Baldwin case that we still don't know and that we're still going to find out as it trickles through. For now, I'm going to take a second. I'm going to look in the chat, see if there are any questions about Alec Baldwin specifically before we move on to Theranos and before I call in our special guest who comes in and is going to answer your questions about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos today. But yeah, let me know in the chat if you think it's fair or unfair that he can be shielded contractually. That happens in the world of business and in our country, but it doesn't mean you have to like it if you're a potential juror. So let me jump into the Alec Baldwin questions here. He should pay and then he should go after the company for indemnity. So sometimes this will happen, but in reality, if you have that contractual agreement and the other company forces you to prove it or forces you to do this, go defend yourself, and then if you lose, you pay, and then you have to go after them, well, then you can sue for attorney's fees and costs and damages on top of whatever they have to indemnify you for. So a lot of times they don't wait until after the fact to get indemnity. Exactly, Lucia. Shielded from liability after as if we're talking about some minor damages, and as if we're talking about a slip and fall on the set. That's really what they're contemplating when they put that indemnity agreement, is somebody slips on some sawdust or somebody trips on a cord and breaks their leg and they have to sue for work comp damages. Well, then sure, Alec Baldwin should be shielded. But for something he specifically does, we'll see if there's an out in that contract or in that provision. We'll see if there's a way around it, because I promise you, these plaintiffs' lawyers representing Elena Hutchins are going to do everything they can to target Alec Baldwin. Not just because he's deep pockets, but because he is the hand that pulled back the hammer. Or that dropped the hammer, maybe would have been a better saying. Question, has the prosecutor made a decision on Alec Baldwin and is just waiting to announce? Our prosecutor's doing stuff every day on the Baldwin case. So it's still an open investigation. They have not made a final decision as far as I've seen yet. So we are still waiting. He could potentially still have criminal charges coming down the pipe. And this civil indemnity clause that protects him and shields him from civil liability will have nothing to do with criminal conduct and with criminal charges. If they find this to be a negligent killing, some kind of manslaughter, an accidental shooting, whatever it may be, this will not shield him from criminal liability. Ms. Mann's pancakes, just started your diet. I don't know why that popped into my head. I've been watching Beard Meets Food. I don't know if you guys, any of you watch him on YouTube. He seems hilarious, and he does pancakes all the time. Yeah, Listerine. I thought the scene wasn't in the script. So I've heard kind of conflicting things about this, whether or not the scene was in the script, whether or not the scene was definitely in the script. But whether or not there was a gun, whether or not it should have been pointed, whether or not the trigger should have been pulled, whether or not the hammer should have been cocked back. Now, what exactly was in the script and wasn't, I think we're still going to find out. We're hearing it from both sides at this point. Yeah, him saying that the guy is overwhelmed with grief was disrespectful. A lot of things were disrespectful there. We've got a lot of unfairs here. If he sues Rust LLC, isn't he suing himself? But if he's guilty of manslaughter, that civil position will fall away. Correct, Andrew. I don't know if he owns Rust LLC. But again, just because you own a part of an LLC and they indemnify you, you're not just suing yourself. You'd rather push that liability on the LLC because it's protected. They can't get, like, if you sue Alec Baldwin, you can get into his personal bank accounts. If you sue Rust LLC, of which Alec Baldwin is a member of the board or whatever, I'm making that up, I don't know, you can't go after his personal bank account and him personally if you're going after Rust LLC. Ms. Mans, how can Baldwin legally shield himself with contractual provisions prior to any of this stuff happening? So if you say no matter what happens, if anybody gets hurt, you can't sue me personally, the company's going to handle that, you can shield yourself like that. Yeah, Marlene Barone thinking the small print is tough. He was the producer for Rust LLC. I don't know what you mean by the producer for an LLC. You can, be one of the members or managing members or board of directors or things like that. I don't know what the producer. I know he was the producer for the movie. I agree with you there, but that doesn't mean they can go after him personally. So Beverly Alford, good question. So ultimately, one side saying it's the actor's responsibility to check the gun. The other side saying it's the armorist's job. What is the actual law? And I will tell you right now, there is no law or statute that you're going to be able to point to that says it is the actor's job to check the gun. It is more of a reasonable person standard. They have to prove who had what duty, and if they breached that duty, again, we're talking civil cases, negligence. And the way you do that is with expert testimony. And you could have, and I expect you will have, one expert that says it's the armorist's job, and you'll have another expert that says the actor is the last line of defense for this stuff. And it's going to be up to you, the jury, to determine what is the law and what is the factual scenario. What duty does everyone have on set? And you're going to have to listen to multiple expert witnesses and determine who you believe and weigh their credibility and weigh their testimony. And then you determine, I believe this one over this one. This one seems biased, whatever it may be. And then you decide it was actually Alec Baldwin's duty or it was actually the armorist's duty. And that's how this case is going to get decided. There's no law that just says it's unlawful to drive if your blood alcohol level is above a 0.08. I mean, there is a law that says that, but not for this. I think you got what I meant. I think Baldwin will settle out of court. I always think that. I would bet that on every case, just that I bet most federal criminal cases are going to end in conviction. That's just what the numbers say. There are more people than Baldwin to blame. Sure. Yeah, absolutely more people than just Baldwin. But I think most of the consensus is he is at least partially at fault. So Caroline, I think this is also a good point. Curious that if it went down as Baldwin described, we call that in a light most favorable to Alec Baldwin, and she did direct him to point the gun and pull the hammer back, would she not be jointly liable? There is well, it depends on the state and the rules of the state, so I don't want to say right now, but I'll just say in Florida, they can absolutely put a percentage of liability on the victim. Absolutely. She could be partially at fault. If she did direct him to do exactly what he did, she should be partially at fault as well. Now, she wasn't holding the gun. She didn't check it. She's not responsible for checking to see if the bullet is live. Actually, maybe an expert will say she is because she was the cinematographer. Maybe she was in charge of everything. I don't know. But she absolutely could have a percentage of liability if it happened exactly as Alec Baldwin said. And she told him to do what he did. And again, that would be up for a jury to decide. 100% liability total. So Alec Baldwin maybe has 40%, and then the armorist has 40%, and Hutchins has 20%. They can do that where everybody can be liable depending on the percentage, and you would split the damages based on the percentage. Can they go after the land that they rented? No. If he is an employee of the company, doesn't that change the liability? It can change who pays for it, and there can be vicarious liability where if he is in the scope of performing his duties, then the company can also be liable just because their employee or agent is liable as well. So J.R. Callahan, what about the longstanding custom and practice in the industry? That is for the experts to convince the jury, basically. I don't think there's going to be any rule of law that the judge is going to say, this is how it is, and may take judicial notice, as we say. Like the judge will sometimes take judicial notice that the weather was what it was on a certain day. But I don't think they're going to do it on something like this. He should settle civilly. Bad publicity if he doesn't. Doubt he'll be found negligent in a criminal case. We will see. Rodney, you missed the entire discussion on Alec Baldwin and Rust, but don't worry. We're going to cut it out, and it'll be posted as its own video next week. And Beverly is helping me start up the Tragos Pancake House, which I guess she wants to call it the Travis Pancake House. And since she's my only investor at this point, I may give her some leeway in choosing the name. Okay. That will complete our discussion on Alec Baldwin and the Rust civil cases. Thanks for watching this episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you like this content, please share it with your friends. Make sure you subscribe to our page and like our videos. If you want some interaction, get in the comments and we'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to know any more information about our firm or this page, you can find out in the description or visit tragoslaw.com. We post multiple times throughout the week, so make sure you hit that bell so you can get the notification and not miss out on the next episode.